Welcome to the Next.js 14 app router crash course. In this crash course, we will look at the app router itself. We will also look at things like React server component, caching, server actions, special files, dynamic routing, parallel routing, and partial pre-rendering. This course requires you to know the basics and intermediate levels of React, and knowledge about pages router in Next.js is a plus. So a while ago, Next.js announced their new router, which is the app router, which runs React server components by default. That means any other thing which you have used like Vite or Create React app uses client-side components, which means that the bundle is downloaded to your browser and the actions are taken like rendering something on your page on the client side. But in React server components, what happens is there is a server which sends the static HTML back to the browser and there is no rendering done on the client side. Or I should say there is minimum rendering done on the client side, as most of the stuff is rendered on the server and the static HTML sent back to the browser. This has of course brought a lot of confusion into the community, and that's why I have created this tutorial to clear things up. So let's get started. So yeah, let's get started. Again, I assume you already know the basics of React, so I won't be explaining every single React stuff, but yeah, let's create our Next.js application. I'm going to use pnpm. If you want to use npm, that's fine, but I'm going to use pnpx, create next app, and I'm going to name it YT tutorial. Let's hit enter, and now you will get a wizard which says, do you want to use TypeScript? I'll say no. Do you want to use ESLint? It's fine, I'm just going to do no. Do you want to use Tailwind CSS for this tutorial? No. Do you want to use the SRC directory? Yes. Now the final question, would you like to use app router? And yeah, if no, it will use the pages router. Do you want to customize default import alias? If you want to do, just do it. We will not touch it. Perfect. So let's wait for the installation to be completed. Perfect. Now let's go to YT tutorial and let's open Visual Studio Code here. My Visual Studio Code for whatever reason spawned on a different monitor, but here it is. Now let's have a look at the folder structure. If you have used Next.js pages router, this root folder structure should already be pretty familiar to you. So you have next.config.mjs, which contains all the Next.js configuration. If you have something, you can add it here. Then yeah, you have package.json with all the dependencies and all the commands. Then you have an SRC folder, and here is the difference. In SRC you have an app folder, which is representing the app router. In a Next.js application, you can have the both pages router and an app router. That is done so that you can migrate to app router as soon as possible without any downtimes. And then you have the public folder as usual. Inside the app directory, you have two different things like globals.css, which is your global CSS file. Then you have the layout.js, which we will touch in a few minutes, where we will go into the special files. But the page.js is the actual page. So this is the root page of your application. So let's run this Next.js app. So I'm just going to do pnpm dev. And this should run on localhost 3000. So let's go back to my browser and I'm going to run the command here. So localhost 3000. I have the docs here because I want to show you the docs in a little bit. So let's go to localhost 3000, and yeah, pretty much Next.js stuff. There is nothing different right here, but the differences are not visual, but you will see them as we progress. Let me get this desktop right here. Perfect. Now this is a React server component by default. First of all, we will look at the React server component and how it works, and then we will look at the folder structure and stuff. Okay, first of all, I want to remove everything from here. So I'm just going to select everything, remove it. Probably I also want to remove this. So I'm just going to have a big div. Oops. I'm just going to say hello world. Now let's go back to a browser and we should see a hello world right here. I'm not going to style it, but I want to show you a few things here. First of all, this is, as I said, not a normal React component. This is a server-side component. So you cannot use client-side hooks. In fact, I don't think you can use any hooks here. So if I do something like create a state, so if I have name, set name as a state, and I'm just going to use useState here, you will see no errors right here, because to VS Code it doesn't seem like there is any error. But if you go back, you will see that you are importing a component that needs useState. It only works in a client component, but none of your parents are marked with use client. So they are server components by default. The thing is that this is a client component, and whenever interactivity comes, you cannot use a server side component inside places where you need interactivity. So the thing is here that you cannot use this hook at all. And this is a useState hook. That's why it's showing you this beautiful error message. But if you're using some kind of custom hooks, I don't like the fact that there's a very weird error. So if you're using something like React query, it will show you some kind of different webpack errors, and I don't like that. But if you see some kind of error like that, just make sure that this component is a client component. So how do we make this a client component? Do you need to change the config in next.config.mjs? Nah, it's not that difficult. Just go at the top of the file and you just use client. This will make this a client component. Now what will happen is that this page will be rendered on the client side. Why am I saying this is very important? First of all, let's look if the page is rendering or not. Yeah, it is rendering. Perfect. The thing with we are emphasizing a lot on client components and server components is because if you are using client components, you need to make sure that you don't have any kind of database calls or some kind of private business logic in here. But if you're using server components, you can make database calls here, and all of those database calls will be made through the server and not on the client side. So if you're using like database calls on the client side, there's a high chance that people might grab your database credentials and do something wrong with it. So you always make sure that use client at the top only when using client components, and if you want interactivity and you do not have any private business logic in there. About that topic, I think there is also a very good npm package. If we go back here, if we go server only npm, you will see this one. Let's wait for it to load. I think it's going to take a lot of time for whatever reason. It does not have a readme, but what it does is that if you install it in your Next.js application, you can have a file which can act as a server function, but it will ensure that this file only runs in the server. So if I'm going to create a new folder here, I'm going to call it utils. I'm not going to focus a lot on folder names and stuff here, but I'm just going to call functions.js, like whatever. And I'm just going to create a new function called add. And I'm going to have, I know this is a very generic one, but let's have this function. Let's assume that this has some kind of very important business logic. So what I can do right now is that this is a client component, right? So what I can do is I can just say console.log, and I can say add, and I can just pass in the numbers. Now let's save this and let's see if it's getting logged. I'm not using any kinds of use effect. I just wanted to show you the basic concepts here. So yeah, it's saying 3. And remember, this is the browser console. That means that this is running in a client component. So if I remove this use client and just save this again, if we reload this, yeah, we still have the state. I don't think so. We have the state. Oh, we are importing it. We got to remove it. Yep, now we do not have anything on the browser console, but if we look at our console here, we see 3, which means that this code is also running on on the server side. But the thing is here that there's no way for you to ensure that this function only runs on server. So what would happen, like if you have any kind of private business logic in here, and if you want that even if some developer accidentally imports this into a client component, this should not work. What you can do is simply have an entire file with only just server functions, and you can simply do import server only. I gotta install the package though, so hold on, let's go back. Let's do npm install server only. Perfect. And now I can have server only here, and I'm just going to save it. And now what will happen if I reload the page? It will I need to start the thing. Perfect. Now if I reload this should continue to work because we are still in server component. If we go to our terminal, it says 3, but if I change this thing to a client component now, so I'm just going to have a use client here. I cannot type. Perfect. And I think that's the error we wanted. So it says when this is the correct file we sparse, it's the functions.js file. So it says you're importing a component that needs server only. That only works on a server component which is not supported in pages directory. I know this error message does not make any sense, but I think it fulfills the purpose, right? So even if you have like private logic here, even if you import into a client component, it will simply not work. So yeah, this is a package will help you do that. Okay, so I wanted to have a look at server components again because this doesn't end here. There's a lot of complexity to it. So I want to go back to the docs here and show you something. So typically what you would do in a server component is fetch something and turn it into static HTML and send it back to the client side. But there might be some kind of data fetching you are doing, right? So if you go to fetching, caching and revalidating section, you will see we are on the app router thing, so not on the pages router. So we have 4 options: on the server with fetch, on the server with third-party libraries, on the client via route handler, on the client via third-party libraries. So we do not need to worry a lot about the client components one. We already know how data fetching works in client side, but let's look at on the server with fetch. Now the thing it says that Next.js extend the native fetch web API to allow you to configure the caching and revalidating behavior for each fetch request on the server. React extend fetch to automatically memorize fetch request while rendering the React component tree. The thing is that, let me find the thing. It says that, I want to show you this section. I accidentally showed you the wrong one, but it says caching stored data so that it does not need to be refreshed from your data source on every request. By default, Next.js automatically caches the return value of fetch in the data cache on the server. This means that data can be fetched at build time or request time, cached and reused on the data request. So this means that Next.js does not always require a server to be run. So if you completely rely on cache, you do not need to worry about it. And what it would turn out to be, it will be a static application which will give you all the files and you can still host it up. So that's how it will work. But by default, everything is cached. So if you make a fetch request hoping that it will give you the latest data, good luck, because it's going to be cached and you need to mention that it's not cached by using no cache instead of force cache. I know it's a bit messy, but there's a lot of different things like revalidating. So you can also revalidate all the data on your website through after some kind of time. So you can have next here and you can say revalidate 3600, which means 1 hour. So imagine that you have a blog and you are making posts, and what you want to do is like every 5 hours or every 30 minutes you want to refetch the post and not have after every user comes to your website, you don't want to load it from your CMS to save costs. So what you can do is you can have a revalidate tag here which revalidates every 1 hour or 30 minutes or whatever time you choose. So even if no matter how many people hit your website, they will only see the cache data and not the latest data. But after each 30 minutes, the data will be renewed on the server side and your users will see the latest data. So this might be very good for some use cases, but not all. So it's up to you to decide if you want to use revalidating, time-based revalidation or not. You also have on-demand revalidation. So if you create some kind of post on your CMS, what you can do is trigger a webhook which hits the route handler of your Next.js app and it does revalidate everything for you. So this is the revalidate tag function. So if you have a webhook which calls your route handler, you can simply call this function and revalidate everything you want through that. I want to show you the cache thing in action. So what I have done, meanwhile I was paused, I did use a JSON server to mock an API, and this is the file which it's serving. So it's serving it on localhost 5555 which has 2 posts. So we are going to ignore the comments and profile thing, but I'm going to use the posts here and try to see if the caches do something. So what we are first going to do is we are going to try to make a fetch request. So since this is a server side component, we can do something like async function. So I already have the async function here. So you can always have an async function in server components. So you can simply do things like const response is equal to await fetch, and we are going to call localhost 5555 /posts, and now we can do const posts await response.json, and now we can simply do something like you can even render it out. You know what, let me see, it's a title, right? So we can simply have we can have posts.map, and for every post for every post we need to have a div, I cannot type today, which will have the post.title. Perfect. Now let's try it out. I'm going to first remove everything like imports and stuff, because let's make things clear. Let's go back here, let's refresh this page. It's going to take, now we have 2 posts here. No matter how much you reload, you'll have 2 posts here. Now if we go back and if we try altering this thing, and by the way, it's directly serving from the file. So if you remove one thing, it will show you it will return the updated data. So I'm just going to remove this one and save this, and I'm going to reload the page here. It still shows 2 even though the API is serving. So we can simply go to Thunderclient to show you that I'm not cheating here. I'm going to create a new request, and I'm going to say http localhost 5555/posts, and let's send it. And we only have 1, and in our Next.js application we are seeing 2. Now what's happening? Next has cached this data into its server and serving us every time, and it's being forced cached every time. So what should we do about this situation? Let's go back here and let's have a new options here. So here we can have next, next, and here we can have, I think it's okay, hold on, let's go back and let's see how they did that. It was normal cache, there was no next here. So we can simply have cache, no cache. You also have the options here even in JavaScript. So you have default, force cache, no store, only if cached, reload. I'm just going to use no cache. We don't want any caching for this one, but you can always configure using revalidate things. We are not going to do that. There is something wrong, it seems. Then this needs to be a comma. Perfect. Let's go back and let's reload. It's already showing 1. Now let's go back and let's try to paste the other thing again. We need to have a comma here. Let's go back and let's reload. We have 2 again. So we have completely disabled caching, and I just want to show you the caching thing because most people get confused here, because why are their updated data not showing up, and they mostly blame API for that. But it's actually a Next.js app router thing where everything is cached by default. So you need to configure how it's cached. I think caching is a very good feature. You just need to configure it so that it's beneficial to you. Very quickly, I also want to cover server actions. Server actions are these functions that run on your server. So traditionally with server side components, you cannot have literally any kind of interactivity, but there is this thing called server actions. So what you can do is you can have a form, and without adding any type of interactivity, you can have a simple form. You can have text fields, you can have everything a basic HTML form can have. And then you can have the form action as a function here. So what happens is Next.js creates a server route for this behind the scenes, and it does all the things like submitting all the data to this function and stuff. In code, you just have to write a function and just have the use server directive here. So what's happening here is we are just passing in the function here, and this function will be running on the server, and it will do all the necessary actions like posting things to database or calling an API on the server side and stuff. But here we're just going to console log to see if the thing all actually works or not. Server actions is pretty new. I think it was in beta in Next.js 13. I'm not really sure about it, but it was not in production. So there was really not much you could do with server components apart from displaying data. But now you do have a choice of submitting data from a form. I do have a detailed video about this. It should be in the description below. That's why I'm not covering it in a lot of detail. You can go ahead and check that video if you are interested in learning more about server actions. Let's go back here. I'm just going to reload just in case, and let's fill it out the form. I'm just going to have Atharva, and I'm going to have hey@atharva.codes, which is actually a real email ID. So if you want to drop me an email, feel free to do so. I'm going to click submit, and I think it should be doing something. Let me go back to my terminal, and it prints everything out just like a console log. But the thing I want to show you here, let's go to the network tab. I'm going to refresh this page, and I'm going to type it again. So Atharva, hey@atharva.codes. Now let's have a look at the network tab. So if I send this, it's from localhost, and it's actually making a post request, and it also has payload. So it's actually sending the form data and also has the action ID. So that means that the server action is actually hosted as some kind of route and in the backend, and it's being called, and it's just making things easier for us. Also, if you want to revalidate something here, you can always do that here. So you can always have the revalidate tag function, or you can have the revalidate function which can revalidate the entire route. So if you have like a record which you're adding, So after adding a record, the server will refresh every record and it will store it in the cache. It's something you can do. Okay, so I wanted to show you revalidation in action because I thought it's not being given a lot of attention by me. So if we go back here, I have made something like this, a post displayer and creating a post. So what have I done is in a server action, I got the title and then I made a post request to our JSON server. If you have any API that would work, I'm just using JSON server for this, and we just passed in the title here to make the request and add the thing to our JSON, and it will work. And we have a response which should be cached, and we will just display the posts here. So the current expectation is like this will run, it will add the thing into the JSON file, and this will still be cached and you will still see the old data, which is exactly the case. Let's try to verify it right now. And it's going to create a post called test post. Let's submit this. Yeah, absolutely nothing happens. If we refresh this, it stays the same. If we go to db.json, it has added an entry. Don't worry about the ID, it's going to be random. So let's get rid of this and let's try to see what we can do. The options here are that you can use no cache here, so you can add the no cache option like we did earlier. But I think there should be a good method, right? You cannot just leave it at no cache and like every time someone visits your URL, you are just trying to make API request on and on and on when it's not really required. So when will this data ever change? Whenever someone adds it or someone removes it, right? So how can someone even add it here? Only through this server action, at least in this case, right? So if you have some other case, you will revalidate from that. So how do you revalidate the data which is being fetched here inside your server component? After the fetching is done, we can do revalidate tag. You know what, before revalidating, we need to actually give this one a tag. So we can just give it a tag, next tags, and we can pass in an array. This can have different tags, but I'm just going to have it as posts, and then we are going to use revalidate tag, and I'm just going to pass in posts. Oh, there is only one thing, so we don't have to pass in an array, so posts. Now let's try this again. Now I'm just going to reload it. There's only 2. If I create post 2 and submit it, we will have 2 more because the last one wasn't really added. So now if I add something like post 3, if I submit it, it's going to be added here automatically, all with just minimum JavaScript. All it's doing is we are just revalidating the tag through the server action, and it's getting revalidated here and the data is being fetched again. So yeah, I think it's pretty cool, and I think you should be paying attention on this and don't miss out on the different things you can make using this. Okay, so remember I was talking about the layout.js file before. These are all the routing files. So layout.js is one of them. So what's happening is that what happens is that this is the root. So localhost 3000 is this one. If you want to create a route, if you want to create a different route in your application, what you could do is you can simply create a new folder here. I'm just going to call it test. Let's call it, I guess, route 1, I guess. I don't like the test logo being appeared there. So, and now I'm just going to create a new page.js file. The name should be page here. It's a compulsion. So I'm just going to do it, and I'm just going to use RFC to create a new component. I'm just going to call it route 1 and save this. Let's go back, and now we can simply go to localhost 3000/route 1, and we'll have route 1 here. It's pretty simple. Now what's up with all these layout.js files? As I was showing you in the Next.js documentation, these are all the routing files. So the layout file is actually what makes the layout of a page, and the page is the actual page. Then you have files like loading, not found, for 404 errors. So if you have a blog post route and if the blog post does not exist, you can simply throw the not found page. Then you have an error page, a global error page, a route file for creating API endpoints, and template, and I think default, I think we will look at default data. So yeah, these are the special files. You don't even need to use most of them. I think the most important ones are like the loading one, the page one, and the layout one, and sometimes even the error ones. If you are primarily using React server components, I think the error one should be good. I think this specifies a good error. If you can create an error boundary and display an error just for a specific part of the page and not literally nuke your entire application just for showing an error. So this is a route 1 thing. What if this page add a nav bar and stuff. So what you would traditionally do is you would add a nav bar component here, and then you would go to a footer. So you would just go and add a footer here. That's how you would do it, right? But the thing here is that you don't need to do it here. So what's happening here is the layout from the parent is being applied here. So what's happening if I have something like a navbar text here. So if I save this, if I go back, the navbar will be displayed here. So it goes from top to bottom. So I have the layout here. It will appear in all of the children. And if I create a new layout.js folder, I'm just going to copy this one. I'm just going to copy this one, and I'm going to create a new layout.js here. I'm going to paste it here. We don't need the global.css. If you want, you know what, let's have it. So it's in the upper directory. Perfect. Yeah, I'm just going to name it navbar2 this time, and let's see what happens. If we go back, what's happening? Let's look at the errors. Text contains does not match server rendered content. Yeah, I think it's some kind of weird error. Oh yeah, I made a very dumb mistake. So what was happening there is the layout, the previous layout already had the HTML and body tag, and what it was doing is it was nesting another layout in it. So this one also had the body tag and stuff. It was breaking every single thing. So I removed that and replaced it with just an empty thing and empty fragment, and now we have our output. It's navbar, navbar2, and then route 1. So what's happening is the navbar is the main layout, and the navbar2 is the layout for the route 1. So if we see, we have the route 1, the layout here is being rendered, and if we go back to localhost 3000, by the way, only the navbar one will appear. So this is how you can manage the layout. So you can have a very complex layout. You can have a sidebar. You can even just have one navbar based on the route you are. So I think it's a pretty cool feature. There are a lot of different things you can do. You can also have a loading page. So I'm going to have a new page called loading.js. I'm just going to have an RFC here. Hello. Oops, I think I made it a comma, right? Yeah, perfect. And now I can have loading, and here I can have 3 dots. And what I can do is I can go here and try to delay the page loading. So I want to do something like, let's see. I think I can use the sleep function. So this will create a new promise which will resolve after 2 seconds. Let's make it like 5 seconds or something. And we need to make this an asynchronous function. I want to see how loading works in here. So let's go back and let's reload this page. Interesting. It's not showing the loading which is actually happening. Let's find out why. Alright, yeah, I'm pretty stupid. What I did, I had this promise thing inside the layout.js file of the main root files. What was happening? It was not working because what happens is the layout nests the error component here. So it creates a suspense boundary and has the fallback as the loading component. So what happened is that when the layout itself is being clogged, it's not be able to render the loading component. And that's the reason why it was happening. So I transferred this thing to the actual page of route 1. So if you go back and reload it, you will see the layout is the same and it's just loading. So what you can do is you can have some kind of skeleton components here and it will just work. So after 5 seconds, the page is being loaded. So yeah, so as you noticed earlier, so the page was stuck in loading in 5 seconds. But if you had the loading.js file, the initial content is loaded rapidly and the other content is being streamed in later. So that's, I think, is a very good feature. All the content is loaded first and the content that actually needs to be fetched is fetched later, and everything is super fast. The next thing I want to talk about is dynamic routing. So there might be some instances, right, where, for example, in Twitter, you have twitter.com/athudevastali, which is my Twitter account. So this athudevastali thing is a variable, right? So it's my username. It can change for every single person. And what Twitter does, it fetches the username which you provided through the URL bar and it tries to give you the profile of the person if it exists. So what are they doing? The main username part is actually dynamic. So it's the dynamic route which they are using to get the username and get the details for you. So how can we implement a dynamic route here? So for example, after route 1, I wanted a dynamic route where I could get some kind of username. So how could I do that? I can simply create a new folder here, which is again a nested route. And instead of giving it a name, I'm going to enclose it with these brackets and I'm going to have a variable name, which is going to be important later. So I'm just going to call it username here. and let's hit enter, and then you can treat it as like a regular folder in Next.js app directory. So I can create a new file called base.js here. You need not have a layout. If you want it to inherit the layout of the previous one, you need not have it. And I can simply call RFC here, and what I can do is this page will have the params, so I can get the params here. And now what I can do is I can simply say username params dots the variable name you had. So for us it's username. Perfect. Now what you can do here is you can even nest it further. So for every username, if you want to see a post, you can create a new folder in here called bracket post, and you can still access your username inside that thing. So if you have a lot of nesting there, you can still access the ones you have created previously. I'm not going to do that, but it's possible. I just wanted to show you that. So yeah, now if we save this and let's go back, I'm just going to go to route 1 and I'm going to type in my username. Yeah, now it shows my username, and it depends on whatever you post in here. So if I did 123, it is going to say 123. So yeah, that's how dynamic routes work here. Now let's move on to parallel routes. So it's a little confusing, but I will try to explain in a best possible way. So I'm just going to close the route 1 folder. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm just going to call it dynamic, actually parallel, just to name it correct. I hope the spelling is correct. don't make fun of me in the comment section. Now let's create a new file called page.js. We're just going to have an RFC. Yeah, I think that's fine. Now what parallel routes does is, like, let's go into the docs and let me give you a better idea using this. So what happens here, is there a better diagram here which I can consider? There isn't. So what happens is you can load in 2 different routes in a single page layout. So imagine the A and B are different kinds of I think it's A and C. Yeah, it's showing the loading state, but basically what's happening is that you can show 2 different things, 2 different routes in a single page. So how we can do that? Let's try to do it. So how you can create a parallel route here is you can create a new folder, and I need to I need to prefix the parallel route name with @. So I can call it I think I'm just going to go with user, and here I can have a new file again called page.js. Again I can do RFC, I can name it user, save it. The next route I want to have is admin. I will go ahead and create a new file, page.js. I'm going to do RFC, name it admin, save it. Now what I can do, that these are automatically become slot because you already have an @ before. So what you can do is you can go here, and in the props you can have things like admin and user, which are actually the components here. So what we can do is after the page I can have a new div for admin and a new one for user. I have a negative feeling it won't work, but let's try to see it again. So it should not be route 1, it should be parallel. Let's go there. So we only see the page and we do not see both of these. So I guess I did something wrong. I think this can only be done on the layout file. So I'm just going to try to get this thing here. So I'm just going to go to the layout. It's so confusing. I'm just going to create a new layout file here. So in parallel, I'm going to have a layout.js RFC for the layout, and I'm just going to paste it here. But also we need the children because we also of course want to render the page thing also. So now we can have div, we can have the children, which is actually the page for this component and for this route actually. And then I'm going to have an admin and the user. And let's go back to the page and remove all of this stuff because we are not using it here. Let's save this. Let's test it again. I checked out the documentation to find it out, and yeah, it's working. So what's happening, it's getting the routes, it's getting 2 different routes and it's spitting out here. The last thing I want to look in this video is partial pre-rendering. So it's an experimental feature in Next.js 14. So you cannot use it without installing the Canary version and enabling the experimental flag, but I think it's pretty important to jump right on it before it's released to the public. So let's read this. Next.js 14 contains a preview of partial pre-rendering, an experimental feature that allows you to render a route with static loading shell while keeping some part dynamic. In other words, you can isolate the dynamic parts of a route. For example, they have this image where all of these things are static or pre-rendered or revalidated stuff, and then these have these always dynamic stuff which always appears here. So when a user visits a route, a static route shell is served, ensuring a fast initial load. The shell leaves holes where dynamic content will load in asynchronous. The async holes are streamed in parallel, reducing the overall load time of the page. So and the thing is this, that you do not need any kind of extra APIs. Everything is just done, so you do not need to worry about it. So this is the basic tutorial on how to work on it. This is in the experimental thing, so it also has experimental in the bracket, so we can see what to do. First of all, we need to upgrade our Next.js to Canary, so let's do that. I'm going to do pnpm install next canary. Pnpm does have some issues with versions and stuff, and I hope it does it. So let's go to package.json. We have a canary version here. Perfect. Now let's go back. I don't think we need to do anything else. Oh yeah, we need to enable the experimental flag for that here. So experimental ppr true. All right, so experimental, oops, I cannot type today, ppr true. Perfect. Now we can use partial pre-rendering. Now I want to see a example for this. So partial pre-rendering example. So interesting thing is that I haven't tried it out. I'm just trying it out in front of you in a video. So let's see which is the best example here. By the way, you can always look at this thing. I think I think you can always look at this chart. It's pretty interesting, but I'm not going to cover it right now. So yeah, these are basically components that load in dynamic data, and yeah, then you can have a fallback. You just need to wrap it around a suspense and you can have a fallback. So let's try it out. So we already have a static page, I believe. So let's go to route 1. I'm just going to remove the username thing. We do not, okay, all right, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to have this here. We are just going to copy the timeout thing and we're just going to add it to different components to see if it works. Let's go ahead and create a new components folder here in src. So I'm just going to create a new components folder, and perfect. Here I'm going to say some data loader. Actually some data.js and some data loader.js. For this one, I'm just going to use RFC. This is going to be a server component, even though it's out of the pages directory. app directory, still it's server component unless we have the use client directive. So some data, perfect. And now we can have simple this thing, and we can have an async function here. Perfect. Now this will take some time to load. It will just print out some data, and then we can have a some data loader. Perfect. Now let's do RFC. I'm just trying it out myself. If some error comes, then yeah, I don't know. There might be some error. So let's try it out. Loading. Perfect. Now we can try using it, right? I think we need to actually import it, right? First of all, yeah. So we know that these are going to generate data in 5 seconds. So we do not want it to block every single thing. So what we are going to do is we are going to wrap it inside a suspense boundary, as they said, and we can have suspense fallback, and we need to import the loading, not that loading. We need to some data. Hold on, what was the name here? Some data loader. Yeah, it was loader. Perfect. And now we can wrap that component inside of this suspense. So I can just say some data. Let's try it out. I'm not really sure if it works or not. Let's go to route 1 now. Oopsie, we need to I always forget about this. It's so dumb. Yeah, it says experiments, use with caution. It's not really the best right now, but whatever. Now it says loading. I think it's the route loading, right though? Nah, I think it was. Okay, let's try to remove the loading.js from the route and let's see what happens. I don't want to see like it might be interfering with it. Let's reload. Okay, hold on, this is not doing great. Let's try it out on localhost 3000, not 3000 but /route1. Yeah, now the static shell was instantly loaded and now it's loading in the dynamic. It thinks it's a dynamic content, but it's taking some time. That's why it's just showing you loading, and it just loaded everything, all just by using React server component and not adding a single client thing here, increasing your performance by just a bit. But I think it's so. This is your partial pre-rendering, and that's where we finish the crash course. Remember that this is just a crash course, and you should actually go through the documentation and try to learn something new. There's a lot of different things here, like things we didn't even cover, like intercepting routes. You have middleware, internationalizing. It's always a pain, but yeah, there's a lot of different things, and every single thing here just has an insane value. So there are notes all over the, like, even if you read the good to knows, there is a lot of different things that you would never imagine, like when you're coding, and you would read them and you were like, if I didn't know this, I would have messed up somewhere. So I'm not saying that just go in and read all of the documentation and don't build. I say just build. But if you are interested in learning more about Next.js app router rather than just building it, just go inside and just try to dig deeper. But if you are just here to build something because this is a crash course, I understand you just probably want to build something and just get done with it. It's fine as well. So yeah, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed the crash course and learned something new. If so, I would appreciate if you click the like button, hit the subscribe button, and share this video with your friends so that they enjoy the same amount of value that you are enjoying right now. If you have any kind of suggestions, any kind of content suggestions, what I should be posting, if you have any kind of build suggestions, I made a blog video just a few days ago, and if you want me to create some kind of builds like that, make sure you leave that in the comments below as well. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.